As investigators dug deeper, one detail refused to fit. All 6 men had been warned. Not directly, not verbally, but through a sign posted near the old access road, half buried and deliberately weathered. It read simply, "Leave what's buried." None of them turned back. And by morning someone made sure they never would. When state police sealed off Red Hollow, they expected to find evidence left behind by panic or greed. Instead, they found order. The bindings used on the men were cut cleanly after death, removed and taken away. No rope fragments, no fibers, no knots left to analyze. The killer, or killers, had planned not just the act, but the aftermath. It raised an unsettling question. How many times had this been done before? Former law enforcement later admitted the case frightened them. Not because it was violent, but because it was restrained. Violence without chaos, death without noise. It suggested rules, discipline, and repetition. The possibility that Red Hollow wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a longer pattern, was something no one wanted to confront. Locals in the nearest town, Silver Creek, refused interviews. Doors closed. Conversations stopped when deputies entered diners or gas stations. One bartender quietly told an officer that place never emptied out. Some people stayed when the mines shut down. They didn't want neighbors. When pressed for names, he walked away and never spoke to police again. The town was known locally as Red Hollow, an abandoned mining settlement 30 miles from the nearest paved road. Once home to nearly 500 people during the silver boom, it had been dead for decades. Empty houses collapsed inward, mine shafts yawned open beneath rotting boards, and the wind carried dust through streets that hadn't heard footsteps in years. Yet in 1971, someone was still watching Red Hollow. Investigators traced the Prospectors map back to Reno. The retired miner who sold it denied knowing anything about Red Hollow beyond rumors. But under questioning, he admitted someone else had asked about the town weeks earlier. A man who paid in cash, asked about old claims, and wanted to know who still cared about the place. The description was vague. The trail ended there. In the decades after the case was closed, no memorial was built for the 6 prospectors. Their families received death certificates, sparse explanations, and quiet suggestions to move on. Red Hollow never appeared in documentaries or textbooks. It survived only in rumor, in half-finished notes, in warnings passed quietly between people who still traveled Nevada's back roads. 6 men went looking for silver in 1971. What they found instead was a line they were never meant to cross. The desert didn't warn them, someone else did, and when the warning was ignored, the response was final. By the early 1990s, Red Hollow had become an unspoken boundary rather than a location. Prospectors avoided it. Surveyors altered routes. Even illegal miners, known for taking risks others wouldn't, treated the area as poisoned ground. Nevada State Police quietly stopped responding to reports connected to the site, classifying them as environmental hazards or navigation errors. Officially, nothing more had happened there. Unofficially, everyone knew better. The 6 men were prospectors, not locals. They came from 3 different states, connected only by a shared belief that Red Hollow still held unclaimed veins of silver beneath its hills. They arrived in 2 trucks just before sunset, carrying equipment, food for 3 days, and a hand-drawn map purchased quietly from a retired miner in Reno. None of them mentioned the trip to family members in detail. In the early hours of July 14, 1971, 6 men entered a Nevada ghost town that no longer appeared on most maps. By sunrise, none of them were alive. No gunshots were reported, no emergency calls were made, and no witnesses ever came forward. Sometime after midnight, the power of the storm masked all sound. What happened next did not resemble a fight. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no scattered tools. When the bodies were eventually found, they were positioned deliberately, spaced apart. Each man silenced before he could alert the others. This was not a robbery. Their supplies were untouched. Their trucks still sat where they'd parked them. Within a week, rumors began circulating in nearby towns. Some claimed Red Hollow was protected by men who never left after the mines closed. Others whispered about a private claim, violently defended long after paperwork had vanished. A few locals refused to speak at all, insisting only that the desert remembers who trespasses and punishes those who ask the wrong questions. If this story made you question how many places are protected not by law, but by fear, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. These stories aren't just history. They're reminders that some truths are buried on purpose, and some places stay silent because someone is still listening. One theory never left the files. During the final years of mining, Red Hollow had been bought quietly by a private holding group that never developed the land. No structures were added, no claims renewed. Yet taxes were paid for years by a shell company that vanished in the late 1960s. Who actually owned Red Hollow in 1971 was never conclusively determined. Ownership, like the murders, dissolved into paperwork and silence. Red Hollow was never officially marked as a crime scene again. Maps continued to omit it. No warning signs were posted. Yet hikers reported finding fresh boot prints decades later, and once, a newly painted board nailed to the same access road. The message hadn't changed. Leave what's buried. In 1984, a private researcher requested access to the case records. 2 weeks later, his car was found abandoned outside Silver Creek, engine cold, doors open. He was located the next morning, alive but shaken, and refused to explain why he had driven into the desert at night. He withdrew his request and left Nevada permanently. Search teams found no camps nearby, no vehicles hidden in the hills, no spent supplies. Whoever carried out the executions had come light and left clean. The desert offered no tracks, no witnesses, only distance. After 3 months, the case went cold. Files were boxed, evidence shelved, and Red Hollow returned to silence. Former deputies admitted, years later, that the absence of answers became the answer itself. Some places enforce their own rules. Some histories erase intruders without leaving fingerprints. And some massacres remain unsolved not because evidence is missing, but because no one is willing to ask the final question out loud. Red Hollow is still there, empty, waiting. Nevada State Police struggled to build a timeline. No radio traffic, no shell casings, no identifiable weapons left behind. Autopsies revealed controlled force, applied quickly, consistently, and without hesitation. Whoever did this knew exactly how much pressure was needed, and how long silence could be maintained in the desert before discovery became inevitable. What authorities found days later suggested planning, restraint, and silence rather than chaos. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on real events. The murders were never solved, no suspects charged, no official theory confirmed. 6 men went looking for silver in a place the desert had already claimed. And whatever guarded Red Hollow in 1971 made sure the town stayed empty by making an example that still echoes across Nevada's forgotten roads. By nightfall, a storm rolled in from the west. Winds howled through the abandoned buildings, rattling loose tin and broken windows. The men took shelter inside the old assay office near the main shaft, unaware that the structure had been used recently. Footprints in the dust, later discovered by investigators, suggested someone else had been there earlier that same day. The question was simple: who else knew they were coming? Today, Red Hollow remains off-grid and largely inaccessible. Satellite images show nothing unusual. No buildings, no vehicles, just desert, reclaiming what humans once carved into it. But those who pass nearby still report radios cutting out, engines stalling, and the overwhelming sense that they are being watched, unwanted, but observed. The first body was discovered 4 days later by a state surveyor who had taken a wrong turn while inspecting nearby land claims. He initially assumed the man had died from exposure until he saw the marks on the neck and the bindings at the wrists. When deputies returned with him the following morning, they found the remaining 5, all executed with methodical precision, all facing away from the town as if ordered to kneel. What disturbed investigators most was not what they found, but what they didn't. No defensive wounds, no signs of panic, no evidence the men had tried to flee. The positioning of the bodies suggested obedience, not resistance. Someone had controlled the situation completely. That level of dominance pointed to either overwhelming numbers or an authority the victims believed they couldn't challenge. The autopsy reports revealed another detail authorities never released publicly. All 6 men had ingested water shortly before death, water that showed high mineral content inconsistent with any nearby source. Someone had given it to them, or ordered them to drink it. This suggested trust, or at least control. Whatever happened in Red Hollow did not begin with violence. It began with compliance.